All Things Data podcast. In the spirit of Daniel Kahneman, Peter Diamandis, and Google Moonshots, brings together leading data scientists, technologists, business model experts, and futurists to discuss how to utilize, harness, and deploy data science and data-driven strategies to enable digital transformation. The hosts are Dr. Manjeet Rege, Associate Professor of Data Science, and Dan Yarmala, Director of Business Development of IoT and Data Science. The podcast is produced by the Graduate Programs of Software of the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota.
You're listening to the All Things Data podcast, where we talk about data science, big data, IoT, amongst many other things. My name is Manjeet Rege from the University of St. Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host, Dan Yarmala, who will be introducing our guest today as well. Hi, Dan.
Hi, Manjeet. Yeah, I'm very excited to introduce our guest, Angela Zutavern, who's the author of this fantastic book called The Mathematical Corporation, where machine intelligence and human ingenuity achieve the impossible. She's a co-author with Dr. Josh Sullivan. And Angela Zutavern is the vice president at Booz Allen Hamilton and pioneered the application of machine intelligence to organizational leadership and strategy. She's an inventor of machine intelligence and data science strategies that are now helping business and government organizations make better decisions and gain competitive advantages. She works on a lot of governmental and academic institutions and councils, and we're just pleased to be able to have Angela on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks for doing your podcast. There's a lot of demand for this topic, and we appreciate you putting this material out available for folks.
So let me start off asking, the title of your book is A Mathematical Corporation. I think it would be great if you could define what is a mathematical corporation.
Sure. A mathematical corporation is really a new business or operating model. We looked at a number of organizations across government, the commercial world, the nonprofit world, and what we found was that while people are getting pretty used to machine intelligence and AI in their personal lives, they're really just scratching the surface in terms of what can be done in their work lives. And so the mathematical corporation is a vision for the future business operating model that will not only take advantage of machine intelligence, but will also collaborate with machine intelligence in a new way.
So is it the same thing as applying data science or machine learning models to achieve a particular target, or how does it differentiate from the way AI or machine learning has been applied in the past?
That's a great question, because I think a lot of people still view data science or machine intelligence as a kind of a technical specialty area. The mathematical corporation is really about spreading that throughout the entire fabric of the organization. And it's not just about the technology and the algorithms. It's really about incorporating machine intelligence into the strategy, the overall strategy for the organization, as well as the leadership style.
So, when we mostly hear about AI and the job market, these days, there's a lot of buzz about AI taking over some of the jobs. But what you really, are saying in your book is that in the upcoming years, to really have an edge, it could be a hybrid model of human and AI working together, right? So using the mathematical smarts of the machines and the intellect of the leaders.
Definitely. We never want to take people out of the loop completely. As you know, models are never 100% accurate. Machines get things wrong. People also get things wrong. And so what we want to see is for leaders to stop relying so much on gut instinct and intuition for decision making and collaborate with AI and machine intelligence to really reach better decisions. So it's not about turning everything over to an AI. It's not about an AI replacing human workers. It's really about computers doing the tasks that they're much better at and letting people focus on the things that we're better at.
Angela, did some of the foundation of your thinking come from, cognitive bias or thinking fast and thinking slow? that kind of foundational work where, the intuition is typically wrong when you model it over time. Is that factored into your work here?
Yeah, I love that you bring up this point because, there's a lot of research that shows that computers are right about certain things better than people, but yet leaders are still relying on gut instinct and intuition. And it's not that those judgments don't have their place in business, they absolutely do. But right now we're way too far to the gut instinct and intuition side, and we need to move much closer to, applying machine intelligence and AI in our everyday kind of work decisions. I'll give you an example. One of the stories in the book is about Merck vaccine manufacturing. And they have a 4-stage vaccine manufacturing process. So it includes growing, fermenting, agitating, and purifying. And for years, Merck had tons of data on each of those 4 individual manufacturing processes. They had lots of sensor data. They knew how to analyze data, and they felt like they had optimized each of the 4 processes. But they were still having problems with batches getting contaminated. And when that happens, they have to throw the entire thing out. It's really expensive. So the approach that they took was actually looking across the 4 individual processes, which they hadn't done in the past. Their gut instinct had originally told them that it was the raw materials that were causing the problem. And when they actually combined all the data across all 4 phases, they found that it was a completely different cause. It was some of the reactions in the fermentation process that was causing the problem. So again, people had many, many years of experience with these processes, but the gut instinct turned out not to be right. Luckily, they did take the approach of looking at the data and supplementing kind of the human judgment with what machines can tell us. And it worked so well for them that they're now opening a new plant where they're implementing this data approach across the entire plant. The reason they couldn't do it in the past is they just didn't have the compute power to handle all of that data, but now they do. So it's opening up a whole new set of possibilities.
Angela, one of the things that you talk about in your book is to create value by giving away, right? And
right.
So you're talking about many corporations sharing their data sets openly to create a value. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So what we found time and time again was that many of the big breakthroughs and advances come from combining different data sets. So if everyone just works on their own data set, we're only going to get so far. There are publicly available data sets out there, like government data sets, for example, the census data that I know a lot of organizations use. But again, that's a limited set of possibilities. And so we came across an interesting story with GlaxoSmithKline, where they actually released some of what we considered their proprietary or data that gave them a competitive advantage. And their philosophy was they believed that they would get more value by releasing that data to the research community and enabling greater breakthroughs by doing that. And so, they were kind of taking a big chance, but it really paid off for them. And it goes to show the power of releasing some of this data either publicly or to a limited set of partners or a research community that can help advance your business.
So that also requires a certain amount of change in the corporate culture, right? Because if a particular company has held on to its own data for a long time, suddenly to turn around and share it with the public, right?
Right. I think that everything about machine intelligence and an AI world requires a change in the corporate culture. We have to move away from, these current approaches in business that tend to be very risk adverse, and we have to adopt an experimentation type culture and approach. Machine intelligence or AI models are never good or never right the first time, and also you never want to rely on just one kind of supermodel for everything. which means it's critical to run a series of experiments to actually kind of celebrate failure, not as an end state, but as a means to getting to the even better models and the even better answers that can result from that. So many businesses will talk about failure, and it's okay to fail and fail fast, but it's a lot harder to implement it in practice and to have the patience in business to not abandon some of these experiments before you reach the final outcomes.
Angela, can you talk a little bit about human ingenuity? Manjeet and I often discussed, talking about data analytics and the inability for humans to digest or consume some of these solutions that we're trying to create because it's just coming so fast. And you called it human ingenuity, which I found interesting. So it could mean a lot of different things. And can you explain what that means to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the book, we kind of have a table of what machines are good at versus what people are good at. And so, machines are better at things like pattern recognition, number crunching, memorizing, organizing. People are great at creativity and imagination and vision and leadership and rallying people around a cause. One of the examples from the book that I really find interesting is the NASA example, where they have a team of folks working on an artificially intelligent robot doctor to treat people living on Mars. Now, if you don't believe that living on Mars is even possible in the first place, you're certainly not going to spend your career developing this AI doc in the box. But somebody had the vision to say, not only is living on Mars possible, but we need to figure out how to treat people who may have medical emergencies once they get there. It takes 40 minutes for communications to get back and forth between Mars and Earth. And so if somebody is experiencing an emergency, they can't wait that 40 minutes to consult a doctor back on Earth. And so the AI doc in a box will not only treat known conditions today, but will use machine learning to treat yet undiscovered conditions that might result from the conditions of living on Mars. And the reason I love the example is because those leaders had to create the vision, but also rally an entire set of experts around that vision so they would all buy into it and and choose to spend their time and their expertise on this really, really hard problem. And so time after time we heard, as difficult as and complex as the technology can be sometimes, it's really about these leaders setting the vision, coming up with a previously impossible strategy, and motivating the necessary people and resources to make it happen.
Right. That's a great story. Another question that I have is, just take us back to the beginning or the genesis of the book. Where did all these different ideas come in your head, and you felt that there were some gaps with the human ingenuity and the mathematical corporation? What was your idea and genesis for writing the book?
The idea really came from talking with a number of leaders who were out there doing pioneering projects in machine intelligence for the first time ever. And we started to see a pattern emerge. It included commercial companies, government organizations, nonprofits, you name it. And we found leader after leader who felt a little alone in that they were doing something for the first time ever, and they didn't have a lot of people out there to learn from. And so many of them wanted to share their stories, not only because they're so proud of their accomplishments and the journey that they took themselves, but also because they didn't want other leaders to have to start from scratch. They wanted people to be able to learn from what they had experienced. And this just became such a trend and such a pattern that Josh and I felt like we just needed to get the story out there. And another thing that the leaders shared with us was that every time they heard somebody else's story, even if their business was completely different from their own, it still inspired them to think differently and think creatively about how machine intelligence could fundamentally change their business model. And so those were kind of like the two reasons why we felt like we really needed to tell this story. And we had many, generous leaders who agreed to be a part of the book and share their story publicly. And even since the book was published, we've had additional leaders come forward who maybe weren't ready with their stories at the time, but now they're far enough along where they want to share that as well. And so we just felt like there was a real demand out there for people to know what others are doing.
Speaking of leaders and leadership in a corporation, what are the most important steps leaders can take now, to transform their organizations into mathematical corporations?
It really starts first with thinking differently. And we talk a lot about shattering your own constraints about what's possible. Mm-hmm. And that's got to be the first step, not only for the leader, but for really the rest of the organization as well. So we all have our own constraints based on kind of our life experiences and different views of what's possible. When we hear stories like are in the book or many stories that are out there in the media, social media, Twitter, it starts inspiring people to think differently and to know that there are new potential possibilities out there. So first step is definitely thinking differently. And then the second step is acting differently. And you can have the best models and algorithms in the world, but if you don't change your behavior or take some action based on those results, it's all useless. And so the acting differently piece of it goes back to the culture change that Dan mentioned earlier. It includes putting together the right teams and resources. And by the way, we found that the more diverse backgrounds you have as part of these teams, the better the results and the more creative the outcomes. And it includes spreading the power throughout the rest of the organization. You only go so far if the data science group or the machine intelligence organization, has these insights. Until you can spread that across the entire organization, you won't see the type of transformation that's possible with machine intelligence.
When you talk about an organization embracing this and transforming itself into a mathematical corporation, in your opinion, is this applicable to all industry verticals? Maybe more for certain, less for others, or can any organization turn itself into a mathematical corporation?
Any organization can turn itself into a mathematical corporation. There are going to be certain industries and certain types of organizations that do it faster because they're further along on the maturity curve. One of the easiest things that organizations can do as a starting point is kind of like a self-assessment. And so looking at what data they currently have and kind of the quality and usefulness of that data, also what additional data they may be able to acquire. In addition, looking at what are the toughest business challenges they're facing. So what possibilities would open up if they were able to predict certain factors? In addition, what are their biggest pain points? Where are they spending the most money? Where is customer service suffering? So by looking at those opportunity areas along with the pain points, you come up with the business problems you want to solve. Then you go back to the data. Do we have the data? Do we have the tools? Do we have the platform to be able to run the analyses that we need to run? That self-assessment can be done in a short amount of time, say a few weeks for a large organization, but for a small business, maybe you could do it in a day or less. And so, we have found that this applies equally well to startups, to 100-year-old companies, to government organizations, and nonprofits as well. It's really about changing the thinking and adapting the strategy and the leadership style to the strengths and possibilities of AI.
Mm-hmm.
Angela, what do you think the current skills gaps are out there today? I'm talking the evolutionary road, not the end result that we're envisioning here to enable the mathematical corporation.
I think there's still a real lack of understanding about exactly what data science is and what machine learning is. I think there's a lot of hype out there. Business leaders in particular don't know really today what's possible versus what may be coming in the next 2 to 5 years. I think we're training a lot of data scientists and machine intelligence experts, and that's a great thing, and we need to continue to do that. And in my opinion, we can't do that fast enough right now. But in addition to that, everyone needs to have some working level of knowledge of machine intelligence. It can't just be housed in a technical specialty area. And I'm excited about some of the tools that are coming out now that allow people to make algorithms or do machine learning or build models without having that detailed level understanding. So we'll still need the data scientists to kind of build those tools, but as they become available, more and more business analysts will be able to use those types of machine learning tools the way we maybe use an Excel spreadsheet today.
Right. And so you're saying that data scientists have to become more business savvy and business people have to become more data science savvy.
Yeah, in fact, we did that ourselves at Booz Allen when we launched our data science and machine intelligence practice several years ago. We purposefully brought together deep technical data science experts along with people who were experts in strategy and business, along with people who were experts in storytelling. And we brought those disciplines together and they learned each other's tradecraft. And we saw a huge power in that combination. And so I definitely, after seeing it firsthand in my own company, I believe it holds a lot of promise for other organizations as well.
I want to go back to what we spoke about a few minutes ago about sharing data for a long-term good and maybe for societal good as well. There is a trade-off in doing that, right? Because
right.
Suddenly now you are probably posed with this question. You have possibly a short-term loss versus a long-term gain.
Yeah.
And you are answerable to your shareholders today. You might be having this promise of a bright future tomorrow. How do you overcome that? How do you answer them today?
There's no easy answer to this, and obviously not every data set will be a candidate for sharing or releasing publicly, but we've faced similar kind of decisions in the open source world. So if you look at how companies are approaching self-driving cars, there are several technology companies who are, using the same technology, they're after the same end goal, but they're going about it very different in terms of strategy. So Google, for example, they came up with a set of all possible scenarios that a car could run into and programmed responses to those scenarios. And then they gathered their driver data using Google employees with Google cars. And then you have Tesla, who took a different approach, and they installed self-driving features on all their cars that they sell, and then they're constantly collecting all of that data. And the difference in strategy is that Google, it took them 6 years to collect 1 million miles worth of driver data, and Tesla collects that much data every 10 hours. And where the open source piece comes into play is that Baidu threw a wrench into both of those strategies by announcing that they were going to open source their self-driving car software and data because they believe that the community will actually make faster and better advances. And so, I think we've run into it when faced with questions about when companies have decided whether it's a better strategy to open source their software or to keep it proprietary. I think it's a similar decision process with your data sets. There may not be a clear-cut answer. It may require some experimentation, like we talk about for data science and building algorithm itself, experimenting with one strategy and releasing less risky, say, sets of data and releasing it to a limited number of folks like GlaxoSmithKline. They released their data to people who could prove that they were part of the research community. And so those are some ways you could maybe mitigate some of the risks. But at the end of the day, it does take a leader willing to take a chance sometimes.
In the book, you kind of go through those 5 areas like data collection, storage, and preparation. What do people need to understand about these 5 areas? Like what's the main takeaway?
The main takeaway is that leaders need to be conversant in technologies to include machine intelligence, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, the platforms that it takes to run these kinds of models and algorithms that we're talking about, the tools that are out there and available to use. And also I say the community, because in machine intelligence, no one has to go it alone anymore. There are many options for crowdsourcing solutions or working with a set of partners, to further a particular area. And then another huge impact has been academic organizations. And so I think that businesses partnering with academic researchers to apply the breakthroughs that have already been made in academia, to particular business problems, there's a lot of potential out there. So I do think that all leaders need to be at least somewhat conversant in those technologies. They can always pull in the deep experts when they need to, but every leader out there now needs to understand the trade-offs between open source and proprietary type tools. They need to understand data and sensors and how to collect the data and how to actually make it useful for the organization. And then in terms of machine intelligence, machine intelligence has kind of 2 main buckets. There's the high performance computing and all the chips that are required to run the type of math we're talking about. There are many advances being made in that area. And then the second part of machine intelligence is artificial intelligence. Within artificial intelligence, machine learning is where all the excitement is happening and where all the big breakthroughs are being made. And all leaders need to understand the difference between supervised machine learning, unsupervised machine learning, and reinforcement learning. So I think just having a working level knowledge of all of those types of technologies and then the ability to tap into deep expertise in any one of those areas when necessary is what people should strive for.
That's a great point, Angela. One of the things that I think is somewhat missing in the ecosystem is that we have some great advances in terms of artificial intelligence, machine learning, or some kind of technology breakthrough, but we're lacking a little bit of the domain, right? So in terms of your books, referencing feature engineering, people got to know what variables to weight. So I see it as a 3-part system where you need to have a data scientist, you need to have a domain or a subject matter expert, somebody who's been working on pumps or motors for decades. And then you got to think of a person like the technologist in order to deliver that solution. And I'm finding people saying AI, but they don't have enough of the domain. And we need to make that community work together. I don't know if you sense that or you're feeling that as well.
I'm definitely feeling that as well. And I'll tell you one thing that we've seen is, so the domain expertise is absolutely critical, and I think it's the piece that's often missing. What we have seen is people able to very quickly learn a domain. So the machine intelligence experts or the technologists are able to quickly learn that domain if they have access to an expert, and and really apply it in a fairly quick way. So one of the data science bowls we did 2 years ago had to do with heart health. And we had a cardiologist, Dr. Arai. He was part of the organizing team for the Data Science Bowl. We partnered with Kaggle to reach out to their community of 1 million data scientists around the world to work on MRI scans of the heart. And Dr. Arai did a tutorial, it was maybe 20 to 30 minute tutorial about how you read heart scans. And this is something that trained cardiologists spend many, many years studying. And the participants in the Data Science Bowl were able to learn enough through the tutorial and also through questions on the forums to figure out the domain or medical piece of the problem. And in the end, the teams that won, not only 2 years ago, but also this past year when we did lung cancer detection, many of the teams that won had no prior background in the medical field. Some of them were from the finance field, many from academics, but again, just that access to the domain expert made such a huge difference in what they were able to accomplish.
Well, that goes back to your point on diversity. I've heard that too with Kaggle and other data science platforms where, like a glaciologist will look at something differently than the actuarial on Wall Street. And
yes.
that different approach leads to very significant strides in outcomes or thought processes. So that's really interesting. But also when you were talking about the ecosystem and academic institutions and partnering, Manjeet and I have often spoken about how a lot of the commercial available software is Me Too stuff that's being created for the masses, whereas we're getting into this hyper-personalization. So some of this great stuff has to just be tapped into new approaches, like you were saying, with academic institutions.
Right. I mean, my opinion on that always has been that when you have a tool that is more of a one-size-fits-all, and so if you have like an advanced machine learning algorithm that somebody came out with at a leading conference, it could be a co-clustering algorithm, it could be a feature reduction algorithm. As a tool vendor, if I decide to incorporate that particular new function in my tool, very few people will be able to appreciate that. Very few people will have the knowledge or the technical know-how about this new function that you have added. And as a software tool vendor, there is a cost to that, right? So as a result, what ends up happening is that most of these tools end up looking similar because you're trying to cater to a larger audience. And when you really have that one particular niche need, that cannot be accomplished by a tool that is trying to fit all.
I totally agree with that. And I think that people are going to be less and less accepting of algorithms that they don't have insight into or they don't know how it works. I think as people gain a more sophisticated understanding of machine intelligence, there's going to be more of a demand to, okay, let me know what this algorithm what it's doing and why, and let me judge for myself whether I want to rely on those predictions or to what extent I want to rely on those predictions. So I think the kind of mystery black box approach to tools is not going to cut it going forward.
There's not much attention that is given to the data collection and data prep process as well, because a lot of attention is being given to applying models and building models, but in terms of the time consumption, that hardly takes any time. A lot of time is spent upfront in getting the data into a format that the model can understand, right? So the data cleaning and preparation upfront is a huge amount of time that is not mentioned a lot these days. What's your opinion on that, Angela?
I completely agree with you 100% on that. I'm not sure why more organizations haven't taken advantage of that as a business opportunity area. It's definitely the biggest pain point in data science and machine intelligence, and every data scientist you talk with, points to that as the biggest, kind of time suck. What I'm excited about in that area is the potential for RPA, for robotic process automation, because I think we can train bots to do a lot of the data cleaning that's happening now. I don't know anyone that's doing it really well. Maybe there's someone out there who's already developed it, but I do see a lot of promise and a lot of potential in applying RPA to data prep and cleaning.
Exactly, because when you usually look at numbers about the time spent in doing the cleaning and preparation, you hear of a split like 70% to 30% or 80 to 20, where very little time is required to actually build a model and test it, but upfront there's a huge amount of time. So I completely agree with you on that.
Yeah, I mean, machine intelligence is all about letting machines do what they're good at and letting people do what they're good at. Machines should be way better at data prep and cleaning than people are. We just need to train those bots and those solutions to make it happen.
There are some people I know, I have some acquaintances that are working on MetaTagging, metadata. The problem is it's been siloed across various technology solutions, right? So cleaning it can't clean it for everything when you're in a big data world and everything's unstructured, semi-structured, or structured at that velocity. So I think people are starting to approach it, but you're right. Why not more?
Yeah,
is a question. The other question I had, Angela, is are you going to do another follow-up book to this book, or are you exhausted from the process?
Josh and I haven't decided yet. We are certainly getting a lot of people sharing additional stories that came out after the book was published. And so we definitely want to get those stories out there. We have to figure out, is that a series of videos or should we do a follow-up book? If there's a demand for a follow-up book, we're more than happy to do one. But either way, this book was all about people's stories. And as we continue to get those stories coming in, we definitely want to find a way to share them.
That's fantastic.
Or maybe you could do a follow-up book on the importance of data cleaning and preparation, right?
There we go.
Yeah, definitely. That would be popular because it's a pain point for everyone.
Angela, what are you reading now? What are you excited about now? Is there a book, like other than your book, of course?
So I'm reading Machine Platform Crowd. So like our books actually came out maybe just about a week apart. I think ours came out on June 6th and Machine Platform Crowd came out maybe a week later. And the whole, the machine part of the book is about machine versus people. And the authors have experienced a lot of similar things that Josh and I have experienced. So it was interesting because they've come mainly from academia, and they certainly do consulting projects, but mainly academic background. And Josh and I come from business background, Fortune 500 type backgrounds. And so while we kind of express the ideas in different ways, some of the underlying findings are really similar. So I was encouraged to hear that, and I like to see the way that they explain it versus the way that Josh and I explain it. I think their book is geared much more toward a kind of a general population, and Josh and I's book is really geared toward businesses and organizations, but it's kind of neat to see those synergies.
That's great. Well, where can people find you if they want to get in touch with you?
They can always find me on Twitter. I love Twitter for machine intelligence. I get a lot of my news and articles on technology from Twitter, so I'm out there and active, and I really enjoy that platform for this topic.
Fantastic.
I'm definitely on LinkedIn as well. Definitely more active on Twitter, but I'm certainly on LinkedIn, and I love that platform too.
Fantastic. Well, we appreciate you being on the show. It was a great joy.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.